Klaus Baader. He's co-head of Eurozone economic research at Societe Generale. So we're getting a number of views pouring in really throughout the morning from investors, economists that we speak to, differing views on whether or not a default would be a good thing or not. Before we get to that, tell me, how close is Greece to default?
It's as close as the patience lasts of the IMF and the other European partners. That's really the simple answer. There is, of course, a major problem. And the problem is that Greece is finding it impossible to achieve the agreed budget deficit reduction targets. And so we're in a process of constant renegotiation in which the Europeans give it some leeway in the IMF, the so-called Troika, and on the other hand, the Greek government is imposing additional austerity measures. The trouble is that it does seem that no matter how hard the central government led by Mr. Papandreou tries, they're having a very difficult time actually implementing those austerity measures. And so there's constant slippage, and so there's constant nervousness in the market that the next loan tranche is not going to be disbursed. I mean, the speculation that we have today is, of course, nothing new.
Do you think
on
that's
Friday,
nonsense,
the markets
the speculation that the next tranche won't come through?
Yes, I think it is nonsense, because the top European politicians seem to be firmly committed to not letting a default happen, at least not letting it happen now.
Some of their domestic allies and general public, if you like, they're facing a lot of domestic opposition to that, though, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And the German government is deeply divided between the junior coalition partner and the main party. But in Germany, there is absolutely a political majority for a continuation of the support.
You said that Greek default, or at least putting off any disorderly outcome or credit event, depends very much on the patience of the IMF and the Eurozone leaders. But does the cost of a potential default exceed the cost of continuing with these bailouts?
Well, that's really impossible to say. Nobody knows. Nobody knows how big the economic shock is. But I continue to believe that there is some merit in kicking the can down the road, so to speak. And that is for really two reasons. The first reason is that it allows the financial sector to make additional provisions. They've already made quite a lot of provisions. 21%. Some institutions, insurance companies in particular, have marked their positions, their exposure to market, which effectively means a 50% haircut. But I think there's probably further to go, and that would limit, it's first of all bailing in the private sector, and secondly it would limit the shock if a much greater restructuring actually takes place. And the second reason is that we need to give time to governments that are in the market spotlight, Italy and Spain I'm thinking of in particular, to give them time to show that they can actually get back to a path of fiscal rectitude, and that they can implement the deficit reduction targets that they need to.
Does that mean, Klaus, that you say there's merit in kicking the can down the road? Are the banks then using this time wisely, given the Moody's downgrading two French banks today, Crédit Agricole and Societe Generale?
I'm not sure that I'm best positioned to judge that, but certainly we know that banks have taken, once the PSI was proposed, have taken significant reductions, 21% and some 50%. Now, whether that is sufficient and whether all institutions are doing that, I don't know. But there's certainly action, and there's certainly increasing provisioning against a default risk or a credit event in Greece.
How do you reconcile comments from Angela Merkel that she doesn't want an uncontrolled insolvency from Greece? She's arguing against a default. How do you reconcile that with reports of a Plan B? The German government is putting together a Plan B. We were talking about this just this week, a few days ago, to essentially protect their banks and insurers from a loss on their Greek debt holdings. Well,
I think you have to. I mean, it would be irresponsible not to draw up contingency plans and think about how would this affect our banking sector, what kind of measures would the government have to see. We don't want to stumble into this situation completely unprepared. I'm not 100% sure how to interpret Mrs. Merkel's comments, because, of course, there is a certain tension. On the one hand, she says we don't want a default before 2013 because we don't have the mechanisms for an orderly default in place. And yet, on the other hand, if that is the case, then what is the incentive for Greece to actually fulfill the conditions that they're supposed to fulfill? So it's a difficult balancing act here. On the one hand, Greece has to be given help, but it also has to be put under pressure to deliver on its promises and to get back to fiscal positions which are not completely out of control.
So when do you think we could see a default?
it's very difficult to speculate. But I think the moment, I think that we're in peril every single time the progress on the budget consolidation in Greece is examined by the Troika, and we're seeing these spikes of nervousness in the market every time. So if we get through this one, and I'm pretty sure we will get through this one, and that the next 8 billion tranche is going to be paid out to Greece, but then in December we're going to have the same kind of nervousness in the market and the same kind of need to negotiate and renegotiate, and for the Greeks probably to take yet more measures.
So how do you then, where do we go from here? Because you're assuming the scenario that you have described, your analysis is going by the assumption that Italy and Spain, during this time of kicking the can down the road and giving more money to Greece, will be left alone, that they won't be subject to speculative attacks in the markets.
They are subject to speculative attacks. We've seen that the Spanish and Italian yields have soared to above 6%, but thank God the ECB has come in, has supported the market, and we're all hoping, of course, that the ratification process of the expansion of the European Financial Stability Facility will take place speedily, and that the EFSF will then, hopefully from, let's say, October or maybe November onwards, will take over that role and intervene in the market, and thereby maintain...
Can they afford to? Does it have the firepower to do that?
Yeah, it has quite a lot of firepower. I mean, assuming that the 109 billion package for Greece goes through, the European Financial Stability Fund still has something like 250 to 290 billion to spend. That's a reasonable amount of money.
They don't need, a lot of analysts saying they need at least a couple of trillion.
Yeah, maybe at some stage they will. Okay. But that, again, too, is wild speculation. And, 2 trillion, we can all pick numbers out of thin air. I mean, this is just made-up stuff. Whether it's 1 trillion or 1.5 trillion or 2 trillion is completely open. It just depends on the level of support that the countries will need in the market that are not subject to a program yet. And how far the crisis
could spread.
Correct.
All right, Klaus Baader of Societe Generale, always good to talk to you.
Thanks, great to talk to you.